it's coming through. Now it's coming through. Now it's coming through. This is interesting, isn't it? This is the banker game that we've been hearing about. Wait, I won't be able to talk if you take this away from me.
You want to?
No,
you're okay.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for making all of this happen. And I've got an echo here. Does anybody else have an echo? You're okay? No. It's good to have an echo. You know, Peter Pan had a shadow. I've got an echo. So it's really great to see all of you here tonight. And I've got to admit, it's a little bit daunting to follow Max. I mean, not only does Max provide great entertainment, but he also just got engaged. And it's also daunting to follow Ian, who has promised to have everybody here buy me drinks tonight. So how am I going to get on that airplane tomorrow if you all do that? So what I would like to suggest instead is that obviously Max and Tracy have accumulated enough gold and silver. You people have been giving it to them. And I would like my partner, Kim and Lucas, to stand up over here for just a moment. Kim, would you please stand up for just a moment? So if you have any gold and silver to give to anybody, please give it to her. Max has enough. Anyway, you've been hearing a lot of bad news today, I think. Rightfully so. The world's full of bad news, but I'm kind of the cleanup guy, and I'm here to really bring you the good news and let you know that the solution to all these problems that we have is available. And you're it. You are it. And tonight, we're going to come up with those solutions, and we're going to all go out in the world and change this, because this is our job. This is why we're here. This is why we're really at this conference. Because you have the good fortune of coming into this world during the most revolutionary times in human history. The revolution that we're going through now is much bigger than the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution or the American Revolution. Dare I talk about that here in England? This is the biggest revolution humanity has ever experienced. This is a revolution in consciousness. We're waking up. Are you ready to wake up? Are you ready? Come on, London. Are you ready? All right. It's time to wake up. That's what this is all about. We are at a time in history unlike any that any human beings or any sentient beings on this planet have ever experienced. For the first time in the history of this planet, every being on this planet is facing the same crises. Never was the case before. There were hurricanes some places and tsunamis in other places and earthquakes. But today, but those things didn't impact anybody else very much, where they didn't happen. A little bit, but not very much. But today, we are all facing the crises of global climate change. We can argue about what's causing it, but it's happening. The glaciers are melting, the oceans are rising. And it's impacting not only every human being, but every sentient form of life on this planet. And for the first time in history, we're seeing our resources declining at accelerating rates. And the prices of all the essentials, food and fuel, increasing at accelerating rates. We're seeing species extinctions at phenomenal, terrible rates. For the first time in history, we're all in this together. And for the first time in history, we're all communicating with each other through the internet and cell phones, streaming and texting. We're all talking to each other. I was just recently in the Himalayas in Tibet. David, are you still here? David. There you are, David. David was there with me. David, who was in the Royal Air Force a few years ago. Fortunately, mechanic, because our Jeeps were all falling apart up there high in the Himalayas, and David was repairing them because the Tibetans weren't sure how to do it. So up there, we were up there at, I think, about 17,000 feet at this glacier that was melting, and talking to a tribal chieftain, nomadic chieftain, and he was lamenting the fact to me that his people would never have telephones because the wires would never get up there. And I'd hear the same thing deep in the Amazon, where I spend a lot of time. But a few weeks ago, I talked to that tribal chieftain through an interpreter on the telephone. He has a satellite cell phone, and so do they deep in the Amazon. We are all communicating with each other across this planet. Never happened before. And we're all talking about these crises. And we're beginning to understand that for the first time in human history, our children, I have a 4.5-year-old grandson. His name is Grant. He lives 10 minutes from me in the state of Washington. We spent a lot of time in the forest together. And whenever I take this young man by the hand and walk with him through these forests, I wonder, what is this world going to look like 6 decades from now when he's my age? And I think we all know that if we stay this course, it's going to be pretty horrible. But we have the obligation and the opportunity to change it. But we have to realize, I have to realize that Grant, my grandson, cannot inherit a sustainable, just, peaceful world that's thriving for all sentient beings unless every single child growing up in Botswana, Bolivia, Indonesia, Palestine and Israel also inherits that same world. Never was true before. You people here in the United Kingdom only had to worry about the United Kingdom. We only had to worry about the United States. But that's no longer true. We realize we're all communicating with each other. We're realizing that we're all facing the same crises. We're understanding that we live on a very, very fragile space station, Earth. But unlike the space station our astronauts built, this one doesn't have any shuttles. You can't get off it. And neither can I, and neither will Grant be able to. We got to take care of it. Are you going to take care of it? Yes. Are you going to take care of it? Yes. Did I hear somebody say no? You are. We've got to take care of it. We have to take care of it. And we're getting it. We're understanding that. For the first time in human history, we're truly getting it. And you know what? The geopolitics of our countries, of our planet, have changed radically in my lifetime. It used to be, before my lifetime, a few hundred years ago, that religious organizations basically controlled geopolitics. And then it was governments, nations, countries. Some were democracies, republics, some were totalitarian, but they call the shots. But then, today, it's moved into corporations. It's the corporations that run the planet. They are the ones that call the shots. Make no bones about it. Nobody gets elected to President of the United States. Nobody gets elected to a high position in the United Kingdom or any of the other so-called democracies or republics or any of the other major countries in the world without huge amounts of corporate support. And the corporations own the mainstream media, either outright or through advertising. This is a world that's run by what I call the corporatocracy. And this is very, very new. It's only happened since the 1970s. But this is a fact of life today, that we've moved from religious organizations to nations to corporations. And I also want to address this thing of how much power does a prime minister or president have? Not much. Not much at all. Because they are so controlled by corporations. Most of my lifetime, I think in the United States, the elected officials wrote the laws. But that's no longer true. Today, most of the laws, the important laws, are all written by corporate lobbyists who run them through the politicians that they own. So we've at this incredible place. And presidents, Obama, I voted for Obama, and I'm not speaking against Obama in any way, but Obama is essentially powerless for any major important decisions because he's owned by corporations. He said he wasn't going to take political corporate financing, but he did. And now his financial policies are run by Wall Street, primarily Goldman Sachs people, as our last speaker, Max, just told us. And his agricultural policies are run by Monsanto and the other big agribusinesses, people from those businesses. And they use the excuse, well, these are the people that understand the business best. Yes, and they're also going to go back into those businesses. So are they likely to write laws that will restrict those businesses that they're going to go back in and run? Not likely. And beyond that, Obama, the first day in the Oval Office, if he hadn't already heard it before, was reminded that back in the 1960s, President Kennedy had affairs with Marilyn Monroe, Angie Dickinson, lots of starlets and other women. They didn't matter. Everybody knew about it. They had to take him out with a gun. But Bill Clinton got assassinated by Monica Lewinsky, or Linda Tripp, who set up Monica Lewinsky. It was a character assassination. And the head of the IMF recently, Strauss-Kahn, got taken down by the accusation of a chambermaid that was later in court decided that it was an unfounded accusation. I don't know. Maybe Strauss-Kahn raped her. I have no idea. But what I do know is that he was taken down by one person's accusation. And that sent an incredible message to Cameron and Obama and any other leader. They are vulnerable in this day and age. You don't have to shoot them. They're vulnerable. So we're at this point in history when our leaders can't lead. And so we must move to the next stage. Religious organizations, governments, nations, governments, corporations, and now the next stage is who? The people. The people. And that's what it's all about. That's what this is all about. The systems are collapsing. We, the corporations, have created a global financial failure. This is an absolute failed system. It's totally a failure. And just one example, one reason I can call it a failure is because I can say that in my country, we represent less than 5% of the world's population, and we consume almost 30% of the world's resources. 5% consuming 30%. And we also know that of that 5%, it's way less than 1% that consume the vast majority. 400 individuals in the United States have more assets than the poorest half of the country. That's not 1%. That's 0.000035%. So that small number of people controls more than 30% of the world's resources. You can call it 5%, or you can keep going down, down, down with the numbers. It's minuscule. Meanwhile, half the world is starving or on the verge of starvation. The only way you can describe that is a failure. It's not a model. You can't repeat. China cannot repeat this. Latin America, India, Africa, they cannot repeat this. They may be trying to, but they can't. The numbers don't add up. So we failed. We must come up with a new system. This is the good news. And we all know all this bad news. And now we need to move into what we're going to do to change it. To recognize that it's a failure, and we don't want to go back to normal, because normal is a failure. We've got to move beyond it. You know, when things totally fall apart, it gives you the opportunity to rebuild. And that's where we're at now. Things have totally fallen apart, and we should be happy that they're falling apart. We should all be happy that we're here now at this time, because this is the greatest revolution in human history, and you're part of it. We're here together. So how do we move into this? Before I get into that, I'd like to talk just a little bit more about how we got there. You know, exactly specifically how we got there. And I think I'm in a unique position to do that because I was one of the henchmen that helped us get to where we are. Economic hitman. My official title was Chief Economist at a major consulting firm out of Boston. I had about 50 employees. I had the status. But what I really was a con man. What I really was an economic hitman. And the people who worked for me were not. They didn't know what I was doing out there. What I was doing, what economic hitmen do, we're the ones who've created this corporate empire. And how do we do this? We work many different ways. But perhaps the most common is that we will identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. But the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country, like power plants and industrial parks that help a few wealthy people at the top of the pyramid, but as well as our own corporations, which are the main beneficiaries, but don't help the majority of the people who are too poor to buy electricity, can't get jobs in industrial parks because they don't hire many people. And yet they're left holding this huge debt that they can't possibly repay. And now it's come home to roost for all of us. The same model has come back around to us. But what I did in my job back in the 70s, well, I'd go back to the country at some point and say, hey, you know, you can't pay your debts, so give us a pound of flesh. Sell your resource, oil or whatever, at a really low price to our corporations without any social regulations or environmental restrictions. Or vote with us on a critical United Nations vote, or allow us to build a military base on your soil. And in the few cases where the presidents or the leaders of these countries refused, where they had integrity, where I couldn't corrupt them, then the jackals go in. And they either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. I talk in my books about how I could not convince the democratically elected president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, to buy this system. I could not convince Omar Torrijos of Panama to buy this system. They were both assassinated. CIA-sponsored operatives, mercenaries usually, but under that guise. And in the few cases where the jackals also fail, then the military goes in, and that's what happened in Iraq with Saddam Hussein. So in essence, this is the way it happens, you know. I mean, I did nothing illegal. What I did was taught in business schools. If you want to help a developing country, a poor nation, you inject a large amount of money into infrastructure. And you can show, statistically, an incredible growth in the economy. It happens, you show it statistically. What the statistics don't show is that the statistics only represent the top part, the most wealthy people in the country. And that's true in the United States today. We're showing economic growth, and yet people are unemployed, collateral is collapsing, people are losing their homes. Most of the people are not feeling an economic growth, but the people at the top are. And so what I began to understand as time went on was that these economic models were a fallacy, that they weren't really reflecting the true economy of a country. They were reflecting the statistic, which is totally skewed in favor of the big guys, that 1% or whatever percent it happens to be. And the way that this would work, and as I said, I didn't do anything illegal, but basically I'd walk into a president's office or Minister of Finance or Minister of Planning, or maybe all of them. I walk into their office and I'd say, hey, Mr. President, you know, we want to build a big hydroelectric project and transmission lines and distribution systems. And in this pocket here, I've got, I've got a couple of $100 million for you and your family and your cronies if you buy into this deal. It wasn't a bribe. I would see to it that his brother, who owned the John Deere franchise, would get an incredibly lucrative contract, much more lucrative than it should have been. And his sister-in-law, who owned the Coca-Cola franchise, would sell a hell of a lot of Coca-Cola to the construction workers, and so on and so forth. So I got a couple of $100 million over here for you and your buddies, if you buy into the deal. And if you don't, in this pocket over here, I got a gun. I didn't have the gun, but the jackals were right behind me. I don't know who they were. I didn't know them personally, but I knew they were there. And you know, the United States has admitted to this. We've admitted to taking out Arbenz of Guatemala, Mossadegh of Iran, Allende of Chile, Lumumba of the Congo, Diem of Vietnam. It's on the record. It's not a secret. This is the way we've done it. But we have not done it for the country. This is not a national empire. This is not an American empire. America hasn't gained from this. We did it for the big corporations. They were the ones who gained from this. And they've taken over. And so, during most of my lifetime, I think we could look at the world as this globe with roughly 200 countries, of which a few had a lot of power. At different times, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, the United States. But today, we might better look at this globe, still roughly 200 countries, big clouds drifting around it. These are the huge corporations. They're calling the shots. They don't know any they don't know borders. They don't follow any specific sets of laws. I mean, they can change them. If they don't like the laws in this country, they do it through one of their corporations in another country. They form partnerships with the Chinese and the Taiwanese and the Tibetans. They form partnerships with the Pakistanis and the Indians, with the Palestinians and the Israelis. They don't care. With the Iranians and the Iraqis. They don't care. They're calling the shots. So, I said I'm here to deliver the good news. Have you heard it so far? No. What's the good news? You have heard it. The good news is that the corporations are calling the shots. And who calls the shots on the corporations? You. You. We. The corporations are totally dependent on us for their support, for their prosperity. They are us. I'm a capitalist. But I don't like this form of capitalism, what I call predatory capitalism, that came along in the 70s. Because up until that point, when I went to business school, I was taught that a good chief executive officer makes a decent rate of return for his investors. And he takes good care of his employees. He doesn't lay people off. He'll take a cut in salary before he'll lay anybody off. And he provides health care for his employees, retirement pensions, takes good care of his customers and his suppliers and the community. He pays good taxes, imagine that. And he goes beyond it. He helps to build schools and recreation centers. He takes good care of people. During World War II in the United States, corporations contributed more than 55% of our tax base. This last year, it was less than 7%. 30 of the most profitable companies in the United States, including Verizon and General Electric, paid no taxes whatsoever. General Electric took a $1.6 billion rebate. They got a $1.6 billion rebate. That's ridiculous. And, of course, speaking of General Electric, when the great Jack Welch took over General Electric, he laid off a quarter of his employees and took a huge raise in salary and a big bonus. Now I ask you, is that guy a hero? He's a robber baron. And our world's been stolen by robber barons. But they depend on us. The marketplace is a democracy, ladies and gentlemen, if you will just make it that. It's a democracy. When you buy something or choose not to, you're casting a vote. And I dare say it's a more important vote than one you cast every 2 years or 4 years or 6 years or whatever. Because you're casting this vote every week, maybe every day. I don't know how often you shop. It's a vote. It's a very, very important vote. Take it seriously. Because we have tremendous power over these corporations. We've changed them over the years. When I was in business school, there was apartheid in South Africa, and we boycotted the corporations that supported it. They got rid of apartheid. Rivers in our country, my country, were on fire with pollution. No longer. We forced the corporations to clean them up, to open their doors wider to women and minorities, to get trans fats out of foods. We've had a tremendous success rate whenever we've gone after specific problems. And I want to say something more about this opening doors wider to women. Because you women, the future is yours to a very large degree. You must take more control, because if we change all of this and we do it using the old patriarchal system of hierarchy, patriarchy, we're just going to come back around. We've got to open up more to the feminine values of receptivity and nurturing, building nests instead of robbing nests. You women control so much of the shopping too. You know you do. And you control men's shopping. And that's probably the most important thing in the system today. It is more important, in my opinion, than voting in the polls. Much more important. Because you're going after the real power base. And so you women, and you must take more control of the corporations. Are you women ready for this? Yes. Because you got to take it. We men aren't probably going to give it to you. I will. But the rest of the men here in this room probably won't. So love me. And we men, we have to open up more to our feminine sides, to that receptivity side, to that nurturing side. We must. We've got to move into this new revolution in consciousness. That's part of the consciousness. Being conscious of being sustainable, just, opening more to that feminine side. And so we have a tremendous ability to impact corporations. We've established this in the past. But today, the big question is, what is it that drives corporations? So I mentioned when I was in business school, the things that I was taught that corporations ought to do, and one of them was to make a reasonable rate of return for their investors. But all that changed in the 1970s when I was an economic hitman. And Milton Friedman and Chicago School of Economics expounded. They were the main supporters. He won the Nobel Prize for this. The idea that the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. The only responsibility of business is to maximize profits. It's a sick, sick idea. Capitalism never ever said that before in its 400-year history. That's not capitalism. That's a predatory form of capitalism that's very, very recent, just from the 70s. And in a few short years since the 70s, since that model has been in effect, we've gone insane. We've created a failed global system. It was not that way before. And so we need now to insist that these corporations develop and honor a new goal. And that goal is, okay, make a decent rate of return for your investors, because that's the only way you're going to get them. But only within the context of creating a sustainable, just, peaceful world that's thriving for all beings. That needs to be the playing field. And nobody gets to play unless they make that commitment. So we only buy from corporations that are committed to doing that. And we got to send them emails. It's easy today. We got to communicate with them. We got to let them know. We got to let them know that we're not going to accept anything short of that. We're not buying T-shirts or tennis shoes from any corporation that has slaves working for them in sweatshops in Indonesia and Nicaragua. We send emails to Nike and we say, I love the swoosh. I love your clothes. But I'm not buying until you pay those Nicaraguans, and I've been in their factories in Nicaragua. You pay those Nicaraguans a decent wage and give them health care, and I want to buy from you. Send the emails. Let them know. It is a democracy, and these corporations are looking for us to help them. They're looking for that. I'll tell you a very quick story. A few years ago, Rainforest Action Network, a nonprofit in the United States, went after Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi was the largest cutter of trees in the world, one of their subsidiaries. And Rainforest Action Network likes to get corporations like that to sign papers saying they will not cut old growth trees, rainforests or other old growth trees. They had this collision with Mitsubishi. In the Rainforest Action Network, people were scaling buildings around the world that Mitsubishi owned and hanging banners and so on and so forth. And it got nasty between Randy Hayes, the founder of Rainforest Action Network, and the senior vice president of Mitsubishi. They clashed head to head, got really, really nasty. In the end, Rainforest Action Network won. They've won every campaign they've gone on, including against Citicorp. And they got Mitsubishi to sign this agreement. A few months later, I'm at this little conference in California where these two men are both there. There's only 35 people or so, about 35 at this conference, so it's a small conference. Randy Hayes, who's a personal friend, and Jim, the senior vice president of Mitsubishi, were both at this conference. They've been arch enemies. And I watched, Saturday, we start Saturday morning, in the middle of the morning, there's a coffee break, and the urn's down there, the coffee urn. I watched these two guys. They stayed way away from each other as far as they can get in this small room. And they both headed for the coffee urn. And they see each other. They stop, and they bounce back. Like the same ends of a magnet. We go, whoop. Who needs coffee? I don't like coffee. Don't forget it's coffee. Late in the afternoon, Randy comes up to me. We've known each other for years. We both spent a lot of time in the Amazon. We like to tell each tall tales about our adventures in the Amazon. Randy says, hey, after dinner, what do you say we get a six-pack of beer and go up to the hot tub that's up on top of the mountain and watch the sunset over the Pacific? And I said, that's a great idea. So we did. We head up there with a six-pack of beer. We get there, we come to the hot tub, and there's one guy in the hot tub. Yeah. And he's got his six-pack of beer up there. And now what can he do? I'm sure he didn't want to be. Oh, Jim says, okay, come on in, guys. So, we strip down. And so I'm getting a little worried here. Like, 3 naked guys in a hot tub with 2 six-packs of beer, sun setting over the Pacific Ocean. And 2 of these guys are arch enemies. They've been ready to kill each other. And the third guy, that's the only thing that's between them is me. What the hell is going to happen here? Well, what happened was fascinating, because after we had a few beers, we just idle chatter. After a few beers, Jim raises his can of beer and he says, Randy, I want to toast you. I want to thank you. I and a bunch of other executives at Mitsubishi wanted to do the right thing. We got kids. We love rainforests. I want to take my son and my grandchildren and so on to the rainforest. I want them to be there. But we didn't dare do anything. We were afraid we'd lose our jobs until you and your people forced our executive committee and ultimately our board of directors and stockholders to agree to sign these papers. Once you forced us, once the issue came up, then we could really push for it. Now, I think that tells you an awful lot, because I know many, many corporate executives out there, and all the ones I know are good, fine people with children and grandchildren, and they don't want to see England sink beneath the ocean. They don't want to see the glaciers melt. They don't want to see the rainforest destroyed. They're good people. But you have sent them a message, and so have I. And that message is, God damn it, I want good t-shirts, cheap. And if that means they got to be made by slaves in sweatshops, I'll just look the other way. And God damn it, I want cheap petroleum for my cars. Don't raise the price anymore if that means destroying the Amazon rainforest. I'll look the other way. We sent them this message, and they've encouraged it. Now you and I must come together and send them a new message. And that message is, we understand that Grant, John Perkins' grandson, needs to grow up in a good world. And you're going to make that good world corporations. And that means there's got to be a good world for every child on this planet, of every sentient being. We've got to send the message. And in the United States, I don't know the history here in the United Kingdom, but in the United States we have a great precedent for this, because for the first 100 years, we were a country. No corporation could get a charter in any state in the United States unless it proved it was going to serve the public interest. Charters lasted on average 10 years, and then the corporation had to go back and prove that it had served a public interest and would continue to do so, or it wouldn't get a charter. That all changed in the late 1800s when the Supreme Court of the United States decided that corporations had the right but not the responsibility of individuals. It's gotten worse since. Citizens United, we've had all kinds of laws that are now, we're working to change that. People are rising. Incidentally, just as an aside, somebody once said, I'll believe that corporations, and this goes along with what Max just mentioned about Texas and executions. This guy said, I'll believe that corporations have the rights of individuals when one gets hanged in Texas. So here we are. We're at this amazing time when it's time for us to insist that corporations serve you. Corporations are there to serve a public interest. They're there to serve you and me and our kids and grandchildren. not just that 1% or 0.0000035% or whatever it happens to be. They're there to serve us. Are you ready for that?
Yes.
England, are you ready for that?
Yes.
All right. It is time. So, I want to talk just a little bit now. I'm going to end pretty soon. It's getting late. It's been a long, incredible day. But I just want to talk a little bit about what each of you can do individually. So it's obvious that consumption is one thing, very, very important. Be aware of what you consume and send letters. Force these corporations to do what they want to do, what most of the employees in these corporations want to do. Coca-Cola runs surveys periodically of employee satisfaction. The highest rating they ever got was after the tsunamis in Indonesia, when Coca-Cola sent in millions of bottles for free of fresh water. The employees were ecstatic. And as hundreds of other companies have statistics that are similar to that. When they do good things, the people are happy. And yes, at the top, you heard about psychopaths and sociopaths this morning, or this afternoon, rather. Well, there may be some of those at the top of corporations. I know there are. Enron was full of them. But the majority of the people working for these corporations are not. The majority of them are you and me. In fact, some of you probably are them. I was. I am. Still, I buy from them. We all buy from them. We must change them. So what can you do in addition to being careful of your consumption? Well, I think the most important thing is to recognize that you have passion and talents. Every one of you. I don't know what your passions and talents are, but I know you got them. I have a passion for writing and hopefully some talent in it. So that's what I do. And get up here and blither away periodically to people. But you have passions and you have talents and you got to use them. If we all use our passions and our talents and we head for the same destination of creating a world that Grant wants to inherit, we'll get there. I was, as a young man growing up in New Hampshire, I was a student of the American Revolution. And my ancestors go back over 300 years in the United States. They came from the Plymouth area originally, went to Plymouth, that other Plymouth. And I was fascinated by the American Revolution. And I used to think, and I still think, how fortunate we are that Tom Paine, a native son of England, came to the United States, that Tom Paine did not try to lead armies. And how fortunate we are that George Washington did not try to write pamphlets. Paine had a passion and talent for writing pamphlets. Washington had passion and talent for leading armies. Martha Washington had a passion and talent for organizing women to make clothes for soldiers at the forefront. They all took a different path, but they headed for the same destination. We must do that. We can all take different paths, head for the same destination. I do a lot of lecturing at business schools, MBA programs around the world. Just not long ago I was in China and I was in Iceland doing these. And often students ask me, so if I want to change corporations, should I go to work for a corporation and work from the inside, or should I work for a nonprofit or an NGO and try to change from the outside? And my answer is yes. Whichever, wherever your passions are and your talents. If you can do it from within a corporation, that's wonderful. But if you're going to be corrupted by the corporations, maybe you better stay out. We can all take different routes, but we got to do it every day. Take a little action. Make this a better world. We're going to do it. It's up to us. This is the time of we the people. This is what's happening in Greece. This is what's happening in Spain. This is what's happening in Canada, Quebec right now. This is what's happening in China. Russia, demonstrating against Putin. This is what's happening with the Arab Spring. Latin America, 10 countries in Latin America recently voted in democratically presidents who are standing up to the corporations. 10 countries representing more than 80% of the population of South America. I spent a lot of time in Latin America. I was a Peace Corps volunteer there in the 60s. I go back all the time. I got 2 trips I'm leading there this year. Go to johnperkins.org if you want to join me. Once to the Mayan people in Guatemala, once into the Amazon and Andes. johnperkins.org. And while you're on it, sign up for the newsletter that we put out about twice a month. And in Latin America, 10 countries that during almost all of my lifetime, every one of those 10 countries was run by brutal dictators, mostly put into power by my country, the United States, and kept there by my country. But that all changed in the last 10 years. So things are happening. We're waking up. We're truly waking up. You're waking up. That's why you're here tonight. And so realize, feel that you've got the power. You have the power. You have the power. You know, again, growing up in New Hampshire, I had no idea that the DDT my dad and I were spraying on the swamp behind our house to kill mosquitoes was also killing birds and fish, until Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring, got rid of DDT in the US, and started a whole environmental movement. How many people here have heard of Rachel Carson? Well, who the hell was Rachel Carson? A woman who sat down one day at a little desk in a tiny house in Pennsylvania, a nobody, and started scribbling on a piece of scratch paper. She had no idea she was going to get a book published, much less that it was going to change the world. You're her. You can be Rachel Carson. You can do that. And I had no idea as a kid growing up in New Hampshire that African Americans in my country had to ride on the back of a bus in some states, until Rosa Parks taught me that. How many people here have heard of Rosa Parks? Well, who the hell was Rosa Parks? A seamstress. She was a member of the NAACP, but the most important thing she did in her life, the most known thing at least, was to walk toward the front of a bus. You can do that. You have the power. We have the power. You have the power. How many people here have heard of Jack Woodbury and Richard Davis and Mrs. Schneer? Holy shit. London? I thought this was an educated community here. Well, Richard and Jack were my high school English and history teacher. And Mrs. Schneer was my third grade teacher. But without them, I wouldn't be standing here. Without them, I wouldn't have written books that now have sold well over millions of copies and in 40 languages, and I think are having some impact with some people. They taught me the power of the written word. They taught me to have faith, to have hope, and the ability to change things. They taught me that history is constantly changing things. And we've seen this so much. We've seen the Soviet Union collapse. We've seen the Berlin Wall fall. We've seen so many things in our lifetime that's changed. We can do this, folks. We've seen China go from the Dark Ages in 1970 to now one of the fastest growing, most prosperous economies in the world. We've seen amazing changes. And they taught me the ability to use the written word to bring about change. Mrs. Schneer, my third grade teacher, well, I grew up in this little town in rural New Hampshire, and there was a boys' reformatory in that town. And the boys, the bad boys, the worst boys of my state, the meanest, nastiest kids in my state, had to go to the public school in my town, the same school I went to. It was the only school there was. And they had to stay there till they were 16 because that was the national law in the United States. And when I was in third grade, I was like 8 years old, there was a 15-year-old boy in my class. Wasn't the sharpest needle in town, but he was the meanest. And he'd push me around out on the playground. And I go running to Mrs. Schneer, crying and sniveling. You know, he's mean to me, he's pushing me around. But she didn't know what to do, because if she kicked him out, she had to bring him back, because that was the national law. He wasn't 16 yet, he was 15. And he'd just be meaner. So one day I go running back to her after he's pushed me around on the playground, and she says, "Johnny, you're just going to have to take care of yourself. You're going to have to do this yourself." And I said, "But he's big." And she says, "Well, listen, here's my advice. Next time he pushes you, you just haul off and kick him in the shins and run like hell." I don't think she used the H word. But I did, and a funny thing happened. He sniveled, he whined, he cried a little bit, he whimpered, and then he became my friend, my ally, my protector. It was one of the most important lessons I've ever learned in my life. You know, Take responsibility. Stand up for yourself. And what happens to a bully when you stand up to the bully? It's an incredible lesson. It's an incredible lesson. And I think that's where we are today. We've got the bullies out there. They're a very, very small part of our population. The robber barons. They've stolen your economy from you. And it's time to stand up to them and take it back. Are you ready to take back your economy, your life, your country? Yes. All right. And you've each got to use your own talents and follow your passions. And so I'd ask you as you leave here tonight to really look to that. What are your passions? Because that's the only thing that's ultimately going to work. Where your talents lie, and what are you willing to do every single day? Send an email. Can be a small thing. I mean, maybe you want to go out and do the big things. Maybe you want to demonstrate, get tear gassed, and thrown in jail. That's a possibility. Maybe you just want to send an email. Maybe you want to get together with tea with a couple of friends and encourage them to do things. But do something. And remember, you've got incredible power. Those teachers that I had, you've all had them. How many people here are teachers or have been teachers? The teachers retired or teachers. All right, great. So you're the professional teachers. But I want to restate that. How many of you are teachers? I want to see everybody's hand go up because you're all teachers. Come on. How many of you are teachers? You're going to walk out of here tonight. You're going to talk to somebody. You're a teacher. What are we going to teach? What are we going to teach each other? What are we going to teach our children? Who are we going to put on the cover of our magazines? It bugs the shit out of me when I see people like that guy, I don't know whether you know him here or not, that guy with a funny hairdo who lives in New York, that guy that, he's famous for firing people. Donald Trump. I got a funny hairdo too. You're right. But I need a haircut, but I don't have time. I'm just spending my life in, what the hell, like, what do you mean, you don't like my hair? You should let yours grow a little bit, incidentally, I mean, as long as I can let it grow, I ought to do it, right?
It was a bit of jealousy, that's what I said.
I see. A bit of jealousy. Well, here, it's a wig.
Thank you.
Donald Trump. Why would anybody put him on the cover of a magazine? Or Jack Welch, or whoever. There's a man in the back of the room there with a white sports jacket on. I think he ought to be on the cover of these magazines. Ian Crane. He's an icon. This room's filled with icons. You all ought to be on the cover of the magazines. This is the message we must send. Are you ready for that?
Yes.
That was pretty weak. Are you ready for that?
Yes.
All right. So I want to end this. I don't know whether we'll have time for questions or not, but I understand that all of you are buying me a drink afterwards, and everyone who does, I'll answer a question or two, if I can. Anyway, I want to end by sharing with you a quote which I think is very relevant to these times. And it just so happens that it was written by an Englishman. He'd left these shores, but that's okay. He was nonetheless an Englishman. And it was about 200 years ago that he wrote this, but it's very relevant to today, I think. This was written in 1776. The United States, what became the United States, America, was in deep shit. George Washington had stuck his head in the news, and so had all the other signers of the Declaration of Independence. The crown here would have hanged them if they'd lost the revolution. We sometimes forget that. These guys were rebels, they were treasonous, they were traitors to their country. Washington, Martha Washington, all of them. And George Washington, as general of the American armies, had lost every battle he'd fought, just about. And the Continental Congress wouldn't give him anything, not shoes, not bullets, not guns. And it was said, the statistics that I've recently read, the estimate is that about 20% of the people of the United States supported the revolution. 40% were totally opposed to it, and 40% didn't know what the hell they wanted. So Washington's holed up in the winter of 1776 in Valley Forge, looking pretty goddamn dire. Along comes this Englishman, Tom Paine. Tom Paine writes, December 1776, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he who stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. A generous parent should say, if there must be trouble, let it be in my day that my child may have peace. If there must be trouble, let it be in our day that our children may have peace. And Paine goes on to say, I love the man and woman who can smile in trouble, who can gather strength from distress and grow brave by reflection. By perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious future. By perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious future. And I think that's why we're all here tonight. I think we're here tonight, I think we've been here all day today, all of us, so that in 6 decades, when my grandson is my age, he and his brothers and sisters around the world can look back and say, thank God those people came together in London in early June, instead of going down by the river to watch the Jubilee go floating past. They came together in this room, and each and every one of them made a commitment to do something every single day to create a sustainable, just, peaceful world, knowing that their leaders aren't going to do it. They got to do it. And each one of them knew that through perseverance and personal fortitude, they could create a time for me, Grant, 60 years from now, to have a glorious future. Thank God you all came together here in this room today, and thank God we're all in this together in this amazing time of revolution, the best time that could possibly be to be alive. And we're all committing to go out and creating a world that our children and grandchildren will want to inherit. Thank God, and thank you. Thank you.
Now, we do have time for a few questions.
Okay.
Well, we're just going to, I'm going to limit it to 3 questions because John and Max are going to be around through the evening for as long as you can talk without slurring. And we're going to set the books up on the table over here for John to sign. But unfortunately, we have very limited stock here, but if you do want to get hold of John's books, then go to amazon.co.uk. His book, Hoodwinked, is not available in the UK. It's not published in the UK, so you have to go to Amazon for that book, and I can highly recommend it. Now, we'll take 3 questions. Can I ask you to come out to the front?
Incidentally, the reason it isn't published is for political reasons here in the UK. The publishers here, Random House bought the rights, but they insisted, because of your libel laws, that I take the names of all the corporations that were in the book out, and I refused to do it. And so Random House wouldn't publish it. I figured you guys can buy it in English. You guys can buy the American version in English.
So you're on camera.
Hello. Okay, is it on? Right. I think it might make more sense, all the more sense, that I come from a third world country.
Which one?
Pakistan. I must admit, I must admire that your tone was very deeply and infectiously filled with hope. And I'm sure everybody would definitely agree with that. But at the same time, I would ask you to please portray in a few words the doomsday scenario that you might envision if we don't act. I'm not a pessimist, but I just want to visualize that doomsday scenario so that I could and we could commit ourselves more to that perseverance. I hope you get my point.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I hate to even visualize that because I want to visualize the good. Because I wrote 5 books on shamanism and indigenous people before I wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And one of the books, the title of one of the books is The World is As You Dream It. And I think it's true. And so I don't like to give too much energy to that doomsday scenario. I like to give it positive energy. And I will say that I do a lot of work with indigenous cultures, all of which, in every continent that I've worked with indigenous cultures, which is every continent except Antarctica where there aren't any, they have prophecies that we're entering a time of tremendous opportunity. So the prophecy of 2012, which the Mayan, and I'm taking people down there on December 20th, the big date, if you, again, go to my website, that prophecy is actually, despite what Hollywood shows us, is a very optimistic one. It basically says that there's a time in history ruled by Seven Macaw, a king who's characterized by corruption, brutality, exploitation, materialism, and his head is severed, cut off by the hero twins, a boy and a girl, and he's replaced by Hunahpu, who's a new king that's characterized by spirituality, cooperation, and compassion. And the shamans tell us, and the leaders, the teachers, the Mayan teachers tell us that this is a metaphor for the old paradigm, Seven Macaw, having its head cut off by the hero twins, man and woman, us, men and women here, that the leader won't do it. Seven Macaw won't change himself. We have to do it and replace with a new paradigm. And I think that's it. I mean, the doomsday is obvious. Human species could vanish from the planet. The dinosaurs did. We could just be an experiment that's failed. But would we really want that? You know, a shaman, another shaman woman, a Quechua shaman, high in the Andes, Incan people, one time I do all the translating. When I take a lot of people on these trips, David, you were on a trip, and maybe a few other people here, and one of the people in one of our groups one time said, so how do we save the world? And this woman shaman, Quechua shaman, said, she laughed, and she said, the world's not in danger. We are, as a species, perhaps, and other species. She said, but we're just like so many fleas. If we get to be too much of a nuisance, she'll just shake us off. And who cares? Because the dinosaurs got shaken off, but they're still here. Their DNA's here, their brains in the back of our little brains, their spirits are here. We all feel it. That's why our kids are so interested in dinosaurs. And if we go, big whoopee. Big deal, you know, so we're a failed experiment. Something else will come along, but the Earth won't be destroyed. But she said, you know what the good news is? The good news is Pachamama, the Earth, is twitching. That glacier up there in that mountain is melting. She's sending us a message. So isn't it fun to be here right now? She said, to be the recipients of the message. So let's accept the message, let's listen to it, and let's change. Let's not go the way of the dinosaurs. Let's move into a new era. So we could go the way of the dinosaurs. That's the ultimate doomsday. But I don't even want to envision it. The world is as we dream it. Let's dream a sustainable, just, peaceful, thriving world. We must dream it. And I have to say also the Dalai Lama, one time, one of my groups met with the Dalai Lama. The 30 of us, we were up in Dharamsala. We spent an afternoon in his house, just 30 of us with him, just him and some of his people. And one of the people asked, they said, you know, there's a writer in our country, the United States, who's recommending that everybody around the world stop at a certain time on a certain day and pray for peace. Your Holiness, what do you think of this? And the Dalai Lama said, well, he said, praying for peace is good unless that's all you do. And if you walk away from that prayer of peace thinking you've done your job, that's bad. Because we must pray for peace and meditate on peace, but you have to take action every single day to make it happen. And so it's the dream. The world is as you dream it, but we have to take these actions. So I'm asking all of you here to follow your passions, use your talents, pray, dream of a better world, and do something every single day to make it happen, because that's your job. And it's your fun. What on earth can be more fun than creating a better world for future generations? What could be more fun?
Okay, John Perkins, Thank you very much indeed, my friend. I really appreciate it. John, we need you to take a seat at this table here, and I think the young lad who looks remarkably similar to me has a box of books here. Okay, it's been 3 events, and I really just want to take the opportunity before we rush away to acknowledge the fact that I had a lot of help in putting all this together in Dublin, in Manchester, and here in London. That the teams have worked extremely hard to try and promote these events at such an important time. And so, can you please give a round of applause to the team around here? And I just want to make the observation that John has been in the UK now for a couple of weeks. He was running a workshop at Schumacher College in Devon before coming over to Dublin, and he and his partner, Kim Ann, spent some time in Dublin, where unfortunately they both got very, very sick. I'm assured it had nothing to do with the Guinness or the Jamesons. So they've had a bit of a rough week, and John fortunately recovered sufficiently to come up to Manchester, and hopefully you're feeling a bit better now, Kim Ann? Yeah, you're in good shape. So you're up for keeping John company at the bar, yeah? Kim Ann also has some very interesting experiences to share as well. So if you can't get John's ear, maybe you should have a chat with Kim Ann as well. So obviously, if you're sitting here, yeah, you have the opportunity to get the books. But one final word. I've been asked a number of times today about, will there be a DVD of this event? Yes, because we've had Carl looking after the camera at the back. And maybe you should also please give a hand to Carl and to Simon, because they've certainly helped you to see and hear what's going on here. The DVD will be available. It is going to be, we've been discussing an 8 DVD set. There will be the presentations from all the speakers today. And because there wasn't enough time on the schedule, so I had to bounce one of the speakers off the schedule, so I decided that had to be me. So we're actually going to include the DVD of the presentation I gave in Dublin last week. So it'll be an 8 DVD set. It'll be up on my website later this week. Hopefully it'll be available within the next 4 to 6 weeks or so. But if you go to ianrcrane.com, then you can pre-order the DVDs from there. Okay, all that remains to be said is we're not in the same situation, fortunately, as Ireland was last Sunday. Obviously, they've had a very historic week. I think it's going to take a while, perhaps, to sink in the full implications of what has occurred in Ireland over the last few days. We're not yet in that situation. Hopefully, we won't find ourselves in that situation. Over the last 3 months, I've been running a series of workshops around the UK called Shift 2, the next level. And over 1,000 people have attended those workshops, from Aberdeen right down to Exeter and quite a number of places in between. And let me tell you that the reality of people waking up to what's occurring is incredible. You know, Zbigniew Brzezinski, 2 years ago, made the observation at a meeting with the Council on Foreign Relations, and again, in fact, at a meeting with the Bilderbergers in Sitges, and he said the biggest obstacle to establishing the one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. But you know what? I think that an observation that he made 42 years ago, in a book he wrote in 1969, published in 1970, the book is called Between Two Ages, the Technotronic Era, an incredibly prescient book, but of course he had the inside track. But in that book, he makes a very interesting observation. He said, the challenge for Western governments will be to keep their people locked into consumerist materialism, preventing them from realizing who they truly are. This is the opportunity that we all have to realize who we truly are and take responsibility for the legacy that we leave future generations. Thank you very much for sharing today with us. Thanks a lot.